This is Stephen Sloan. The date is May 17th, 2012. I'm with Dr. J. Ted Hartman in his home, 4018 16th Street in Lubbock, Texas. This is an interview with Dr. Hartman for the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission's Texas Liberators Project, and Robert DeBoard is here as my videographer for this interview. Thank you, Dr. Hartman, for sitting down with us today, letting us rearrange your living room so we could have this conversation. I want to begin in DeRidder, and if you could tell me a little bit about your early life there in Louisiana. You were telling me a little bit about your family, but what are some of your earliest memories there?
Well, DeRidder was a sawmill town, essentially, but it was settled fairly heavily by the Cajun people coming over from the eastern part of Louisiana, partially Cajun, but it was very much Old South influence. And I would say about a third of the population was Negro, was black, and maybe a third was Cajun, and then the other 40% was white. Everybody, all homes had a black cook, and the black and Cajuns intermarried to a considerable extent, and the cooking was very influenced by the Cajuns. No cookbooks, so they all carried it in their head, but the food that we ate was really very good, and I just thought that was the normal for everybody. When we moved from there to Iowa, I had no idea that people ate food like that.
Potatoes and corn and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. It was just sort of flat.
Well, when people think of Iowa, they don't think of the cuisine.
No, that's exactly
But
right.
South Louisiana, they do think a little bit.
That's exactly right.
Now, what did your father do? What was his profession?
He was a professor of forestry at Iowa State University, then Iowa State College.
I see.
But he was a manager of a creosote plant in DeRidder, and that was why he had come south from Iowa, having graduated from Iowa State. And he had met my mother, who was teaching school. She had graduated from Louisiana Normal College in Natchitoches, Louisiana.
Now Northwestern, I guess.
As it is now Northwestern,
Yeah.
That's correct.
So you had said that her family had long roots in Louisiana.
That is right, yeah.
So he took her to Iowa.
Right, yes. He took her to Iowa, and she actually became very fond of Iowa, and became very happy in Ames because of the intellectual element from the university.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I know this is, when did you move from Louisiana?
We moved, I was 10 years old, it was in 1935 when we moved to Iowa. And we children all grew up, I had a brother and a sister, and we all grew up there in Ames, Iowa.
I see.
And actually, as I look back, it was a very sheltered life, because the entire community looked after us.
Mm. Well, I know some defining memories from folks in your generation can be from the Great Depression. Are there some memories that stand out to you from that period?
Very much so. We were certainly not wealthy, but we were not ever wanting of any of the necessities of life. And I do remember the hobos coming to our home on a regular basis in DeRidder, and Mother always fed them. I would guess there were probably 5 or 6 hobos a week would come to our back door asking for food, for a meal, and she never, ever failed to feed them. There was, in Iowa, very little of the hobo.
That's what I'm sure you saw much more poverty in Louisiana.
Yes, much more poverty in Louisiana. Yeah.
Well, what was it like growing up in a college town like that, which Ames very much is?
Well, it was very interesting because the schools were pretty much set up with the notion that all of us would be going to college. It was just that way. I think it probably, some of the children probably suffered as I look back on it because they were not going to go to college and they didn't have the education that probably would have served them for a lesser than a university future.
I see.
Yeah.
But I know your father had that expectation for you.
We never thought otherwise. Yeah.
Well, did you, we know the end of the story, you're going to end up in medicine, but was that something that you were attracted to at an early age?
It was. Our family doctor in DeRidder, Dr. Love, was a very much admired person in the community. And I just always had it in the back of my mind that I would like to be like Dr. Love. And I guess that's sort of the way it stayed.
Well, before we get to that point, I know a lot happens. So let's go up to 1941, which, of course, the war had been building in Europe, but another defining moment is always Pearl Harbor and hearing of Pearl Harbor and reactions to that event. And can you take me through your remembrances of that?
I remember coming home from church and having the radio on and hearing the news that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and we didn't know where Pearl Harbor was, and we got out the atlas and looked it up and figured exactly where it was and what it probably meant to us. And there was very much a depressed feeling throughout the nation, I think. I was, I was 16 years of age at that time. I worked a lot, as all children in Iowa did. Most all of us had a job of some sort, and I did a lot of common labor of shoveling snow and cleaning windows and that sort of thing. And I remember trying to be sure that I was earning enough money so that I could keep money in the bank if I ever needed to do something real with it, and not have to do common labor the rest of my life.
But you liked Iowa, sounds like.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we've liked Iowa very much because people were very friendly and were very open about everything.
Yeah.
And we did have family, my father's families, several, 2 sisters were there, and we had families we visited quite often. But we liked the Iowa people.
Well, so you graduated high school in 43?
43, yeah.
1943.
Yeah, I was 18 when I graduated from high school.
And you made the decision to enlist at that point?
Well, I did, but as a senior in high school, the Army and the Navy offered an examination for all boys. The girls, of course, at that time would not be eligible for anything like that. And the examination was called the A12 V12 examination. And if you passed grade-wise, passed that examination, the Navy would send you to a college of your choice, or they would give you a choice of several colleges, and the Army would send you for basic training first, and then would send you to a college of their choice. Well, I took that examination, as did most of the boys, and I passed it. And I didn't know how to swim because we didn't have any swimming pools. I thought, well, I really don't want to be in the Navy. That was one reason.
Yeah.
And my dad had been in the Army in World War I, so I thought I better sign up for the Army. So I did. I went and enlisted in the Army, and they told me that I would have possibly a year, but at least 6 months of college before I'd be called. So I enlisted in Iowa State, and 6 weeks later I was called to active duty.
Yeah. So couldn't you just learn to swim? Well, wasn't that an option to you, just learning how to swim?
Shoot. Well, they did have swimming pool in Ames, but they didn't have any in DeRidder. All we had was creeks to swim in down there. It wasn't very adequate swimming, sort of. There were no lessons and no real adequate swimming chances down there in DeRidder.
Yeah.
We did have some swimming pool in Ames.
So your first college experience was 6 weeks.
Right.
Wow.
But I had opted out of, through some courses in high school, gotten credit for college. And so I'd gotten, with that and some quick work in that first semester, I was able to get a semester's worth of credits.
Mm. That's great, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're called up, and where do they send you?
Sent me to Camp Roberts, California, to the artillery. And when they were questioning us when we first got to Camp Roberts about various courses we'd taken in high school and all, I had said I had taken typewriting. Well, they immediately decided I was going to be a clerk. So I was assigned to go through clerk school. So we had 6 weeks of regular field artillery training, hiking and learning how to fire all kinds of guns, and then we were sent into classroom and learned how to type more efficiently, and learn all sorts of Army records and various things like that.
Well, can you tell me a little bit about your field artillery training? What some stories you maybe remember from that?
Well, we had once a week we had an 8-mile hike. At the end of the day, we hiked out into some far piece of Camp Roberts to spend the night and cook our own meal, and also had to learn all the methods of personal hygiene when you're camping out like that, with digging your own little latrine hole, and how to do it downhill from the water, digging it downhill from the water flow and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We've also really had to learn how to hike very efficiently, because they didn't let us they had a time limit for us to hike certain distances. And we could only stop short whiles before we'd be hiking again to get where we were going.
But you were going through an accelerated program
Yes, we were.
at that point. Yeah.
And after we were completed 4 months there, they weren't sure that I was going to be sent to ASTP, which the Army called their program, and that was A-12 to start with.
Mhm.
But it was finally decided that they would send me to the University of Oregon, which they did, to the ASTP program there. And it was very pleasant. It was a nice green campus. It was like being on campus again, in a dormitory, and Mrs. Turnipseed was in charge of our dormitory and the food. There is a name like that. That was her name.
So you ate well?
We ate well there. We really enjoyed it. There were very few civilian boys, so we were really having a great time. We didn't have time during the week, but we really did it on the weekends.
The odds were good.
The odds were very good. We thought we were real Lotharios.
I'm not saying you needed the odds to be in your favor, but the odds were good. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that.
They were in our favor.
Well, what specialization? What were you being?
We were going to be engineers.
Engineers. Okay. Okay.
But we were only there when about 2 months, when rumors began to surface that they were needing troops for the ground troops for the upcoming invasion, and they weren't going to be able to just let us stay in ASTP much longer. And sure enough, at the end of 10 weeks, they announced that all the ASTPs were closing except for medicine and foreign languages. And sure enough, it closed. At that point, they sent all of us that were at the University of Oregon down to Camp Cook in California, where the 11th Armored Division was very much in need of people. It was interesting when we marched from the University of Oregon campus down to the train depot. The people in town lined the streets to say goodbye. We didn't realize that we had meant that much.
Yeah.
It was very touching.
Yeah. It sounds like it was.
But we got on the train and 2 days arrived at Camp Cook in the middle of the night, and they got us off and made us all take showers and get physically examined, and got in front of some Army officers who were questioning us about different things, who then decided where we would be assigned. And I was assigned to Company B, 41st Tank Battalion, and I don't know why.
Well, because you hadn't done anything related to even heavy artillery or tanks or
No,
anything like that.
no.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. Well, so once that assignment, you went into training, some training?
Then we started training and learning all sorts of different things about tanks, and then the company commander had an interview with each one of us and asked what position we would like to be in, and he asked if I would like to be a gunner firing the big gun up in the turret, or would like to be a driver. And I told him I thought I could do either one, but so whichever he seemed to think he needed me to be in the most would be satisfactory with me. And the next thing I knew, I was told that I would be a driver.
Yeah.
And that's how it came about.
Well, I want to ask you the first time you got behind and drove. Do you have a memory of when you first got into a Sherman? Were you training on Shermans?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. First time you got behind a Sherman as a driver.
It was pretty intimidating because the first thing was they had air-cooled engines, not regular water-cooled engines. And they required an entirely different shifting sort of systems. You had to double shift and do things that I'd never heard of even. But we learned, and the tanks would jerk and go forward, but we gradually learned how on those tanks had been through the desert training, and they were absolutely filthy. But we learned how to drive them gradually and not make mistakes with them, and go into night fighting, and after being there for golly, it must have been about 6 months, we learned that they were planning to send us overseas.
Do you know about how many hours you got in
Driving?
in those 6 months? That's a hard question, I know. But
It is, but I would say easily by then I had driven 100 hours.
yeah, so you had a lot of comfort.
Yeah, we drove at night and day and weekends. I mean, there wasn't anything, any time that was kept away. I mean, we were expected to be available any of those times to do weekend maneuvers and night maneuvers, and we learned how to go.
Well, I'd like to ask you while we're here, because I know you became intimately familiar with the Sherman tank.
I did.
So I'd like for you to maybe share some of the other kind of peculiarities of a Sherman tank and things that most people don't know about Shermans as far as operating one and what it's like to operate one.
Well, let me first say, when we got our new tanks in Europe, they were totally different because they had two Ford V8 engines welded together, and they were water cooled.
Okay.
And they were so much easier to drive.
Yeah.
But all of the Sherman tanks drew the air for the engine was in the rear, but they drew the air for the engine through the tank. So in the summer it was hot in the tank, and in the winter it was frigid. It was not comfortable riding by any means. The driver sat in the left front. To his right was a huge transmission with a little space above it, and to his right, to the right of the transmission, was the assistant driver. And then up behind us was the turret, where there were three men. The tank commander, who had to have his head out of the turret at all times. In battle, at nighttime, didn't matter. He could not close the turret, close his opening of the turret. That was a no-no. And also then in the turret was the gunner, who had to fire the big gun and then a machine gun. And then there was a loader who would load all the ammunition for whatever the gunner was firing. The the tank had a tremendous storage space under the turret, under the floor of the turret, for all kinds of ammunition and for food. We could store lots of food in there. Terribly noisy. That's why I have hearing aids.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My ears have rung ever since then.
Yeah. Who knows what the decibel level is
Right.
when you've got that full
Right.
bore. Yeah.
The tracks were right here, and this big gun was right here, and I'm sitting here between them. And
And you've got no ear protection.
no, there was never any thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I guess I'll tell more later about the Battle of the Bulge if you want to talk about it.
Well, I definitely want to get to
Okay.
that. So we've gone through your training as a tank battalion, and then when do you leave Cook?
We left Cook in September of that year, after about 6 months of training on the tanks.
Okay.
And there were two full train loads to carry my company, to carry my battalion. And we went different routes across the United States. We traveled south all the way across the southern states, all the way to Georgia, and then north up to just south of New York City at I can't think of the name of it.
Somewhere in New Jersey? Was it in New Jersey?
Yeah, it was in New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Right.
Yeah. So you shipped out from there to England?
And we shipped out from there to New England. We were there in New Jersey about 10 days. And at the same time, several people from our organization had been sent to a camp near there to pick up the new tanks for us and get them started on the way.
Mm-hmm.
And they were in the same convoy that we were on, going over to Europe.
Okay.
It was the largest convoy to cross up to that time anyway. As far as you could look, there was the forecastles of ships everywhere, in every look. I have no idea how many ships.
Were these Liberty ships? Were these
Liberty ships? Submarines were around us, diving in and out, protecting us. All kinds of Navy ships dropping. At one point there were some of them dropping over these
depth charges? Yeah.
Depth charges for submarines and just all sorts of stuff going on.
Well, how did the ocean passage go for you?
It was two full weeks, very slow.
Yeah.
We were not allowed on deck at night. We had to be down inside. We had to have on our vest during the day if we were on deck, which was all fine. Our entertainment, one of our entertainments was the chaplain's assistant, who was from hillbilly country, and he sang all kinds of hillbilly songs for us. I remember one of them was about a drunken driver and whiskey. Saw a wreck on the highway, and I don't remember the thing now. It was.
You wouldn't sing it for us, would you?
No.
There wasn't a lot of entertainment aboard
I
ship.
saw a wreck on the highway,
Yeah.
but I didn't hear nobody pray.
Oh. Well, did your trip across make you glad you weren't in the Navy?
Well, I didn't know enough about it to think. Yeah.
You were wondering what was next, I'm
Yes,
sure.
yes.
Yeah.
We were.
Yeah. Well, talk about when you got to England and what was the your impressions there.
Well, we were very impressed with the first thing they put us on was railroad cars. Okay, different railroad cars than we'd ever seen. All the seats were open from doors from the outside. There was no center row. We'd never seen anything like this before, but I couldn't get over the lush countryside as we went through. Everything was green, pretty. And the first place they took us to was a temporary camp, but we went to the little church there, and it had been it was several centuries old, but it was really a lovely little British Church of England, of course, and we really enjoyed the service, even though it was very different from what we were used to. But we did enjoy being in England, even though we knew something was coming up that would not be so pleasant. One of my friends and I got a couple of passes to London and saw the things that we thought we needed to see. One time, one of the passes, we got to London, and as we got off the train, I said to him, "You know, why don't we ask if I don't even know where Oxford is, but let's just ask if there's a train from here to Oxford and when it's going." And we asked the guard at the gate, and he said, "Oh, there's one leaving in a half an hour. It'll take you an hour to get there." So we took that train and went out to Oxford and spent the weekend there. Went to the annual Oxford-Cambridge rugby football meet and just had a great time. Enjoyed ourselves thoroughly there. Then never get back to London. Went on back to our camp.
How were the Brits?
They were good with us as far as we could see. They were very thoughtful. There was a woman took us on a tour of Oxford and all the colleges, and she was just as thoughtful as she could be to tell us everything and show us everything that she thought was appropriate for us to see. And
Did you still see a lot of effects from the Blitz in London?
we did in London.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was really pitiful. But they were not downbeat. You know, they were just as plucky as they could be. We admired them greatly.
Yeah. Well, so when you're in your staging area there in Britain, I guess you got
We got our new
your new
tanks,
tanks.
and we had to get them ready because everything. See, shipping over, they had to put all of the materials for the inside of the tank in something called cosmoline. That's a mixture of wax and oil, so it wouldn't rust. And we had to spend days on end with big barrels of we had to set up barrels and have water and put a fire under them. And when the fire boiled, we had to put these in and melt the cosmoline off, and then wipe them off, and then put oil on them, and then put them back together and put them in the tank. And that must have taken us our first 3 weeks at our camp there to get all that put back together.
That's monotonous work.
It was very monotonous work, and all that was in the rain most of the time, it seemed like.
Yeah.
But when we got them ready and got started on maneuvers there, we were in the southwestern part of England, in the plains area, and we really were able to do some really nice maneuvers out through there. And these tanks were so different and so nice. They shifted smoothly, and they were totally different with this new engine.
Did you have occasion there to run into some folks that were back, I guess returning?
Never did.
From Europe, yeah.
No, never did.
Yeah, from the mainland, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know, what sense did you have at that point of what was going on with the war?
We listened to the news, and we saw newscasts at the theater of what was going on.
Newsreels, yeah.
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 Right. And that's pretty much all that we knew.
So let's take it up to December. I know it all changes in December 1944.
It did.
So yes, can you take me through that, please?
We were leaving our camp there in England and starting across. We went down to I have to refer to this a second here. I thought I'd never forget some of this. Oh, Weymouth. We went in absolutely pouring down rain, and the driver has to drive with his head out when you're on the road and going more than 5 miles an hour. There's just no way you can do it otherwise. And we drove for 6 hours in that rain, just pouring down, to get down to the harbor at Weymouth, where we were to put our tanks on these landing ship tanks, these ships. And we backed our ships onto those were the prow of the ships would open up like this, and then a great big really a door would drop down, and we backed up on that door and into the tank, into the ship. And we backed all our ships on. Our tanks had a number of ships. A number of tanks could get on one of those ships, yeah. And it took several ships to take all of us. And we all loaded and then moved away from the harbor, and then sat there for 2 days, and we had the finest eating we'd had in ages, and fresh rolls and ice cream, things we'd never heard of for months and months. And it was then that the Germans had started the Battle of the Bulge while we were starting across. We were supposed to be going to southwest France, to where they had a submarine pin and we were supposed to block it. See, they had this submarine pin, and they had kept it all along because the Germans could take care of it from the sea. They could bring supplies in from the sea. So they were still operational.
They,
and
they
were
still
doing-
had it occupied.
Yeah, they still occupied it, and we were supposed to come in and block it from the land and maybe move in on it as possible. And that was our assignment, is when we started to cross on the boat. Well, just as we got to the other side, they totally changed that, told us we were to engage in a forced march across northern France.
Because of the bulge.
To the bulge, yeah. There was the Lorient and Saint Nazaire were those two French places.
I see.
So they had us load up with all of the ammunition we could take, because they were having trouble getting supplies across too.
Mm-hmm.
As they moved inland, they needed more trucks and that could carry supplies on the roads, and so they had us load every tank with every piece of ammunition and food and anything that we could possibly take in the tank. And then we set out on these about a 5-day forced march across northern France, and ended up just barely into Belgium, and not far from Bastogne, and that's then when we started into the Battle of the Bulge.
I see. Can you take us through that first resistance? When you met the enemy.
Yeah. We spent the night just at the edge of south of Bastogne and east of and west of Bastogne, just a little, probably 30 miles, just at the edge of where the enemy was. And then the following morning, we were to take off, and as we usually the artillery gives a lot of fighting, a lot of shoots a lot and prepares the way for us to come in. But they had not been able to get there. And our reconnaissance also had not been able to get there. So we didn't know what we were meeting. But they just put us out into the battlefield, and I kept thinking, well, I hope all the stuff that we've learned that we're going to do by rote, that we'll do by rote, and it'll work. Mm-hmm. And it actually did. As I had to keep in the driver's seat, I had to keep my lid down, so I had to look at where we were going through the periscope. And the tank commander is supposed to keep giving instructions to the driver, but he was really so occupied that he wasn't giving me very much in the way of instructions. But we were doing okay, and everywhere I looked, it seemed like we were going in a different direction, the tanks. But that first day, we ended up gaining about 5 miles, which was the most that had been gained that day in the Battle of the Bulge. We learned later. The first day, though, our company commander's tank was hit and he was killed, and everyone in the tank, either some of them were killed and then 2 of them were captured, and another tank with some of my best friends in it was hit, and the tank commander was killed, and and was injured badly. His legs were shot off, and they had two of my friends had to carry him about 2 miles up the hill. The Germans captured them, and they forced them to carry the tank commander up about 2 miles to their headquarters. This all happened the first day, but we didn't know all that was going on.
Yeah.
But we did know that we lost several tanks that first day. 18 tanks is in a company.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that we had lost at least 3 tanks that first day.
Mm-hmm.
But when we stopped at the end of the day, things seemed to sort of settle down. Germans did a little counterattack, but we turned it back, and it didn't seem to be a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, we went on toward another maybe 4 miles toward a little town named Sloan, and the infantry. We fought with the infantry. Our tanks and infantry fight together very well. The infantry, we were supporting them, and they went in 2 times and got driven back out 2 times. And we spent that night outside Chinon, supporting the infantry, but outside Chinon. And then the following day, we went into the town in force and took it,
Mm-hmm.
with the infantry and us working together. And finally, it was clear enough for the Air Force to come in, but 18 out of 21 houses in that town were destroyed.
Wow. But you were finally getting some air support.
Yeah, but we finally got air support.
Yeah.
That was the first day we saw them.
Yeah. So now, when you're advancing, is there German heavy artillery? Are you facing panzers?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
they were shooting in on us.
Yeah.
New Year's Eve, they really gave us a display while we were filling our gas tanks. It was very good, and the gas tanks are in the back, and you have to stand up on the rear deck. So if there's any sky at all, you're in a silhouette. It's really.
Well, you talked about the tanks, and I know there's been a lot talked about the Shermans versus the Panzers, and just the plating and the tracks and all the advantages that the Panzers had, but the Shermans served us pretty well, didn't they?
It did, because we could keep producing them.
Yeah.
Because they were not nearly as good from an armor standpoint, but from a mechanical standpoint, they were much better.
Mm-hmm.
Our turret, for example, we could do, the gunner just turned a little handle, and he could turn it electrically 360 degrees, and the German had to turn it by hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very slow and laborious.
Mm-hmm.
But the German projectile could go through our tank, and ours would bounce off of his.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I'll ask you. You said you had hoped your training had prepared you for, live fire. But as you got into it, were there things you realized that your training had not prepared you for?
well, they didn't tell us about the German tank. That we had not had any detailed discussion about how good it was.
They were monsters, weren't they?
Right, they were monsters.
Yeah.
But we learned how to face them and get around behind them. We could go through the rear end on them, and we learned how to do that. on our own. No one told us to.
So you learned over time where the weaknesses were.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
But the worst part about the Battle of the Bulge was the snow and ice. And there was no heater in the tanks, so the air was coming through. Our engine had to run all day long, you know. I mean, even if you're not moving, you got to have the engine running. So if you're going to move, you got to go. We got frozen feet and infantry. Not only infantry, but tankers got frozen feet too.
Yeah. You come up with any strategies to keep warm?
No.
Nothing worked.
My dad sent me some, after I sent a letter begging, he sent me some felt boots to wear, which helped.
Well, I know that was a very trying time in December and January.
Well, it was. The 3 months were the worst with all that snow and ice, because the snow was about like this. And it kept snowing.
Well, you know, at least, I guess one thing I think of with operating a tank, is there some advantage to the ground at least being frozen?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah,
Because when it started to thaw, we really had problems.
yeah. And I know you mentioned in your book about getting the track extenders.
We did, yeah. That was General Patton's idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which it helped. It had to help.
Yes.
Yeah.
It did.
Well, when did you know things were changing with the bulge, as far as the level of resistance that you were?
Somewhere. Well, it was while we were in Binsfeld, Luxembourg. Just as we were leaving there, we were no good at tanks were no use in the Siegfried line because it took infantry people to go through all that detail stuff, and because they had so many, they had all kinds of concrete and steel blockage things and connected one to another, and tanks couldn't go through that, but infantry could. And our infantry was doing real well going through that. So they had us out working on the roads, the tank people. So the infantry were working their way through the Siegfried line. But just as they were getting toward getting out of the Siegfried line, they had us come up and start going, and we could tell that there was less ability to resist us at that point. We were making longer drives. We were going maybe 15 or 20 miles in a day and getting some longer movement.
And I guess the resistance you were facing wasn't organized resistance.
And it wasn't nearly as organized, no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And that would have been February, yeah.
I know things began to change very quickly
Yes,
around
they
February
did.
and March.
Yeah, they did. Now, we would still hit, all the way to the very end, we would still hit some pretty vicious resistance periodically.
Well, one story that, there's a couple of stories I know that I want to ask you about for the purposes of this interview. And I'm not sure of the chronology of them, but one of them was the one where you encountered the prisoners in the forest that were released. Do you mind telling me that story?
Well, we were coming along we were moving along, and this was after we had started moving more quickly, gaining more ground, and all of a sudden, these people started showing up in strange-looking clothes, and we couldn't figure out what they were because we'd never seen anybody that had been in a concentration camp at that point. And they started showing up in these stripes, broad stripes, and no one had ever told us. I'm not sure anybody knew to tell us about the concentration camps, but we started seeing these people coming out from the trees, from the woods, and then getting in the road and getting in the way. And we couldn't run over them. I mean, you know, that's not America. But they just kept more and more intensely coming, and we'd find some of them lying in the ditches along the road, and gradually we began to appreciate that this was some sort of prisoner, maybe, because they were wearing similar clothes. And then over the radio, they told us that they had just found out that these prisoners had been released from a concentration camp. I don't remember the name of it.
I think it was Buchenwald.
It was Buchenwald. And
Flossenburg, yeah.
They had been released to get in our way and to slow our path, slow us down. And they did slow us down, but they would absolutely stop us and kiss the front of the tank, or they'd salute us. It was, I couldn't help but cry myself. I had never seen anything like that. I couldn't understand. Of course, I didn't know the whole background picture either. I just couldn't figure out. And some of them had their buddies with them, and one of them was taking care of his buddy over the side of the road, and he wouldn't leave his buddy, who I gathered was dying, and it was just all sorts of little scenes, mini scenes along the way. And they kept coming, but gradually we seemed to be able to get them to stay out of the way, and we were able to move on more. But I think our infantry troops were better at dealing with them than we were, because they were on the ground and could help them understand that they needed to stay away from the road so we could keep our force moving on forward. The infantry did go after some of the guards that had been at that concentration
Some of the SS?
Yeah.
Were you involved in that?
No,
the infantry
I wasn't involved in that.
Yeah, your objective was to keep moving.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the veterans that we've talked to, talk about how nothing had prepared them for that. Even fields of combat.
Right.
It was different.
The first dead people I saw really were kind of hard to accept, and how could people do that to people? But I got over that. But I hadn't seen anything like this, and it was so different.
Well, I'm not sure how long after that that your company was taking, that you found out about Mathausen?
It was about 3 weeks after that,
After
I
that,
think.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing that story about going to Mathausen?
Well, one of my friends was a medic, and the way I got to go there was he was on duty, certain duty hours, and he asked if I would like to go over and see this because it was so different. And I said, yes, I would like to see it. And so he arranged for me to go over when he was going over for his duty hours. And we went over, and he prepared me for it as we were going. And he told me that when he got there, you see, he wouldn't be able to spend a lot of time because he would be very busy doing the medical things for these people that were urgent. But when we got there were these stacks of people like cordwood, and there were still fires going. It was right early. There were still fires going in the furnaces with bones in the furnace. And then the barracks where they had these people, there's so many to one bed. I can't even remember how many. You almost couldn't count them, and they were all so. They're just skin and bone, every one of them, and the people wandering around. You wondered how they could even move. They were just nothing but skin and bone. I was and out in the grounds around there. There was a large ground around there because it was a big limestone quarry, and all around there were these skin and bone people just wandering around, kind of listlessly doing nothing, just moving around. I was glad I got to see it, but I was glad that I didn't have to stay out there.
Yeah. So how long did you stay in the camp?
Only a couple of hours. Yeah.
So, did you get a chance to interact with any of the?
No, because I didn't speak German,
Yeah.
and I didn't know how to ask anything.
Yeah. Yeah. What sort of work was your friend doing, the medic?
He was just doing medical work, and whatever he did, I guess, was medical needs for these people.
Well, one thing it's fairly infamous about Mauthausen is the quarry. Did you see the quarry area?
Yeah.
Or the work area?
Yeah.
Yeah. With the steps.
Yeah, and Goosen is just as bad in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the cave at Goosen since then that had been a factory building jet airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
I was there this last trip 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But in the cemetery that they've got out there at Goosen, and the thing that amazes me is they have made kind of a subdivision out by Mauthausen, and people have bought land and built new houses. And for the life of me, I can't believe
Wow.
that anybody could do that.
Yeah. Wow. It's hard to believe.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder, as you talked about it, if seeing these, did it change how you thought about the war or how you thought about what you were doing there?
Well, it made me realize more than ever why we were there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The first ones, the first ones we saw that were getting in our way made me realize why we were there.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know you're doing your job, but you're not always thinking about the bigger purpose.
Right.
Yeah. So I know it had to make you think about that.
And I was not very pleasant to the German people when we were in the Army of Occupation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, are there anything else about Madhausen that you want to share before I?
The 2 times we've been back, you know, they meet every year in celebration and to thank the 11th Armored.
Mm-hmm.
And there are almost 20,000 people come to that celebration. We've been there 2 times. I didn't understand that when the first meeting we went to, we got there, and as far as you could see, there were buses from all over Europe. And people come who've had a connection. Some of them were the prisoners themselves, who wear a scarf made out of material from their original outfit, strutting.
Mm.
And others who were from families who had a connection. But they all had a connection from Spain, Italy, all over the place.
Hmm. What has that been like for you to go back and participate in that?
It's been very touching. Every time I went, I really got very touched about all of it. And you see that and you think, they're not going to let this happen again.
Mm. Well, I know it's got to be moving.
Yes, it really is.
To know it's something that you had a part in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. Well, let's fast forward a little bit to a happier day when Germany surrendered. When did you get the news? And I think I know what your reaction was, but.
Well, our company commander, whom we really thought highly of, he came into us after our first 2 company commanders one of them got killed and the other one got badly injured with a brain injury. But this one said, I hope that you would maybe just think about your buddies that are not still here.
Yeah.
And celebrate appropriately.
Mm.
And so we did.
So was it a more somber celebration
Yeah.
because of that?
It was.
Yeah.
It was very somber.
Yeah. Well, personally, I know you didn't have enough points to get out.
Right, I didn't.
Because you hadn't been in that long.
Right.
So, so when did you? So you were the Army of Occupation, I know, for a period of time, but I guess you thought you may have ended up in the Pacific, I guess, at some point.
I was destined to go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you take me through kind of that period? Where were you stationed? After,
I got moved around some. They took me out of the 11th Armored Division because it was going to be retired, and they sent me to 2 different armored tank companies, separate, just isolated armored tank companies, and then one of them sent us with our tanks up to Nuremberg, Germany, where we turned our tanks in, and then left us up there to the Army of Occupation outside of Nuremberg. And actually, Nuremberg had a lot of nice activities going on. I attended the war crimes trials. I really I appreciated having the opportunity to do that.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it surprised me how well organized it was, and how they had earphones, and they had immediate translation in all 5 languages that were being used. I couldn't. One of them was the language of the person that was speaking. The other were 4 languages: French, German, English, and Russian.
The Allies language.
Yeah, and when we walked in, this one of my friends that I was rooming with, and I got tickets to go, and when we came in, Rudolph Hess was goose-stepping down the hall, going to the bathroom, and I don't remember, but most of them weren't paying any attention at all. Just could care less of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it looked like.
Yeah. But I mean, from your description, you were impressed how orderly and professional it was.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
It gave
It didn't
them,
have to be, but it was.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was this one trip, or did you do this?
Just one trip.
Just one trip up there to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you showed great restraint not walking into the bathroom Well, so how long were you in Nuremberg? Were you there?
Well, I was there for about 3 months, and then I applied to go to the Army set up 2 universities over there. One of them was in England, and one of them was in Biarritz, France. And I applied to the one in Biarritz, and I got accepted. So I got to go there for 2 months to the Biarritz American University,
Mm-hmm.
and we stayed in all those fancy hotels and had really nice food, and had all kinds of nice. I mean, they had concerts and plays and all sorts of stuff going on, and the local French people were invited to all of it, and it was really a very pleasant episode.
Yeah.
In my life to be there.
Yeah.
Then after that was over, they closed it. I was at the last semester there. They closed it because they were needing us to go back to the Army of Occupation. And I went back for 3 months to Germany, to Nuremberg,
Okay.
and stayed there until I got sent home.
And when did you get sent home?
In March of 1946.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll ask about VJ Day too. I asked you was VJ Day a little more of a celebration than VE Day?
Yes, it was. It was, because I was much happier that I wouldn't be going over that way.
I bet. You decided to not make military your career.
I did.
At some point.
I did.
Did you enjoy military life?
Not really.
Yeah. This idea of medicine that had been planted years ago, you were ready to get back to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, talk about that transition back when you came back.
It was pretty easy just to go right back to school. I had spring semester started about a week after I got home, and I just signed up and went.
Well, how had Iowa State, the university changed? Because I know it was a very different place than when you started.
It was.
A lot of GIs.
Oh boy, it was.
Yeah.
It was loaded with a lot of GIs. Classes were full, really full, but I still figured that I wanted to do medicine. But I had to save my GI Bill because I knew medical school would be expensive, and I better save it for then. So I did.
Well, your
Pretty
dad.
much.
Well, your dad. You probably got tuition at Iowa State because your dad.
No,
No.
they didn't do that.
Oh, they should have done that.
They should have, but they didn't.
Not any money.
So you went. Where did you do your med school?
At Northwestern in Chicago.
Northwestern. Okay.
Yeah.
And then where did you do your residency?
At the University of Michigan.
University of Michigan. Okay. And how did you end up in Lubbock, Texas?
Well, I was chairman of orthopedics at Cook County Hospital in Chicago, and that's kind of a dream job for a teacher,
Yes.
because we had all the residents from all 4 of the university programs coming to Cook County Hospital for part of their program, because we had 350 orthopedic beds, and so we had virtually every orthopedic entity that occurred at any time was there, and it was great teaching and strong students, strong residents from all of those programs, and they came after they were more advanced. So I was really enjoying it, but I was asked to come serve as a consultant to help plan the startup of a new medical school at Texas Tech. And I was so fascinated by it, when they asked if I would join the faculty, I did. That's how it happened.
Well, building something is always is very rewarding.
Right.
Yeah. So the opportunity to come here was to build something.
It was, and it has been.
Yeah.
Yeah, really has.
So when did you come to Lubbock?
1971.
1971.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jean wasn't really happy at first, but
She's forgiven you since then?
oh yeah, it was a great place to raise children.
Yes. Yeah. Very different than Chicago.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we loved it in Chicago. We
Yeah.
really did.
Yeah.
But
Well, I've taken more of your time than I told you I would take, but
no, that's all right.
yeah, before we close, I want to ask you, there's some things I should have asked you that I didn't ask you.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, that I failed to ask you?
Like what?
If there's some things related to your service that you would have liked to share, but I didn't give you a chance to.
Well, no, I grew up fast. I mean, I didn't regret it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. What do you think you took from your military service and into your professional career?
Oh, I matured tremendously, and I learned how to deal with a lot of problems, with with problems that life faces you. I learned how to deal with those very well, very quickly.
This is an odd question, but have you gotten behind in the driver's seat in a Sherman tank since?
I have.
When did you do that?
Well, when we were in Belgium, some years later, I didn't. I'll tell you something else too. When we were in Belgium some years later, a number of private people owned those tanks in Belgium. And one of them asked me if I'd like to sit in the driver's seat, and I said, yeah, I would.
So those tanks that didn't make it back.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. At an international orthopedic meeting, I met an orthopedic surgeon who was 14 years old during the biggest battle in Belgium, the Battle of the Bulge. And his closest friend was 13 in Sloan, the village I mentioned that we took from the Germans. And he insisted that we were to come to stay with them, with this young ball from Brussels, and meet this friend who grew up in Sloan. And we did. Gene and I went for the 50th anniversary, but also to meet Andre Bernat and his wife. And we've all become very close friends. We've been back in their homes, they've been over here, and it's been a great experience. I guess we've been to Belgium probably 8 or 10 times.
Oh, that's great.
And we've really enjoyed the friendship so much. They still love us.
Yeah.
They're still teaching all this to their students in school, which I'm sorry we aren't, because I think we ought to be.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this project, so that's a good way to end. We want these for future generations.
Yeah.
And so I want to thank you so much for your service, but also for taking the time to do your book, which I know was a lot of work, but it's wonderful that we can have it.
Something about the book, too, Jane and I never even thought about. I've had quite a number of letters from parents of my friends who were killed wanting to know more about the death. I never thought about that, but the Army only tells them they were killed in action. And I could tell them details, like one of them was a tank commander. When in Belgium, the German 88 entered that turret, spun around, killed all 3 instantly, and exited. Now, that's worth knowing, you know, to the parents.
Yeah.
And I've had quite a number of letters like that, and we never even thought of some of those sort of things.
Yeah.
One son of one of my close friends wrote and wanted to know a little bit more about his dad. His dad never talked about his Army experience. His dad was injured when the tank rolled over. He never told his family any of that, and I talked about it in the book.
Yeah. Well.
And there's it's just a bunch of things like that I've written about.
Yeah.
So we feel rewarded by just some of that.
Yeah. Well, it's great you did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great you did it. Well, thank you, Dr. Hartman.
You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure.